Yeah, seems that OBS crashed once again. Might have been because I updated the software in between. Let's see. Yeah, is uploaded. It's streaming on YouTube, on Twitch. I mean, I'm gonna check YouTube. And let me just update the name. Update titles. Edit 5.1. One. Actually 5.2. So, okay, let's check if the title is updated. Okay, cool. Okay, well,
and return.
okay, I'll just finish that. Image index.
Make sure to save your code and then build and run. If you move your cursor to the corner of the window, you should now be able to resize the window to as small or as large as you want.
Yeah, let's try it. It's building everything.
Operating systems handle resizing differently. macOS actually does a great job. If you look at what it's doing, it pauses the program and takes the last rendered image, automatically scales.
Okay, and can now scale it. Crash.
To fill the current window as long as I have the Windows corner selected. Once I release the corner, our program resumes and the triangle is re-rendered at the Windows new resolution. But, for example, on Ubuntu, resizing isn't nearly as smooth. This is partly due to the operating system, but also during resizing our program will probably block on the call to GLFW poll events. To get around this, you need to come up with a solution that continues to draw frames while
And let's see. Keeps failing to create options. Fail to create option. And to allocate. And to create pattern layout.
resizing isn't nearly as smooth. Release
Maybe I
resized
missed
case
something.
suboptimal KHR, or LVE window was resized. Then LVE window.reset window resize flag.
Image index.
Recreate swap chain
Option.
and return. Make sure to save your code and then build and run. If you move your cursor to the corner of the window, you should now be able to resize the window to as small or as large as you want. Note that operating system
Go to find usages. And yeah,
Go to a small or make sure to save your code and then build.
let's check the comments if any else. I fixed the incorrect copy constructors, but anyway, change the default constructor shouldn't be. Therefore, you should use also add LV pipeline default. Let's see, pipeline. It may be necessary to remove to temporary add-on. Getting some systems can't coexist. Okay, you have to complete the entire tutorial before the. Okay, and that's good to know. Okay, let's continue.
If you move your cursor to the corner of the window, you should now be able to resize the window to as small or as large as you want. Note that operating systems handle resizing differently. macOS actually does a great job. If you look at what it's doing, it pauses the program and takes the last rendered image, automatically scaling it to fill the current window as long as I have the Windows corner selected. Once I release the corner, our program resumes and the triangle is re-rendered at the Windows new resolution. But, for example, on Ubuntu, resizing isn't nearly as smooth. This is partly due to the operating system, but also during resizing our program will probably block on the call to GLFW poll events. To get around this, you need to come up with a solution that continues to draw frames while resizing is occurring. Okay, now a dynamic viewport incisor are pretty much the same as a regular viewport incisor, except that we specify them in a command buffer rather than at pipeline creation. So first navigate to your pipeline header file. Note that your pipeline config info struct may look slightly different to mine. There's a bug fix that I posted only as a pinned comment on tutorial 5. Don't worry about going back to implement that if you haven't yet, since we will all get back onto the same page now. So first, make sure you've deleted the copy constructors.
And here's yeah.
This will prevent my previous mistake of pointers to bad memory following a copy operation. Then remove the viewport and scissor fields. These are no longer needed when using a dynamic viewport and scissor. So first, make sure you've deleted the copy constructors. This will prevent my previous mistake of pointing.
Pipeline config info points. Pipeline ampersand. Info delete. Pipeline config info ampersand update constant delete.
Following a copy operation. Then remove the viewport and scissor fields. These are no longer needed when using a dynamic viewport and scissor. Next, make sure that your struct contains the viewport info field. Then we need to add two new fields. First, an std vector of v named dynamic state enables. Then a field of type vk pipeline dynamic state create info called dynamic state.
Okay, let's go back. std vector vk dynamic state dynamic state enables
info. Okay, now scroll down to the deep
new dynamic state info. Okay, pipeline dynamic state info. Dynamic state info.
pipeline config info function. Update it so that now reads static void default pipeline config info and takes a pipeline config info reference as the only parameter. Config info function. Update it so that now reads
Static pipeline config info. Config info.
default pipeline config info and takes a pipeline config info reference as the only parameter. Open your pipeline implementation file and let the default pipeline config info
Pipeline config
just defined in the header. Then make sure to remove the local config info variable if you have. Next, remove the viewport and configuration code. Okay, now update the viewport info field.
viewport info. Config info viewport info dot also vk structure pipeline viewport state info.
Video 5. You'll want to move the viewport info configuration back down to here. Then at the end of the function, I'm going to configure
Wait, what?
dynamic states and pieces code if you have one declared. Oh, okay, now
Yeah, viewport info sphere. vk we can pipeline viewport state create info import info. Okay, cool.
config info function. Update it so that it now reads static void default pipeline config info and takes a pipeline config info reference as the only parameter.
Viewport
File, and let's start by updating the default pipeline config info function signature to match what we just defined in the header. Then make sure to remove the local config info variable if you have one declared. Next, remove the viewport and configuration code. Okay, now update the viewport info fields so that p viewports and p scissors are both now null pointers. Note that if you only implemented the first fix I showed in video 5, you'll want to move the viewport info configuration back down to here. Then at the end of the function, I'm going to configure the dynamic state enables and the dynamic state info fields. If you ever feel like
attempt to use delete construct. Config flow.dynamic states.
I'm typing, in every tutorial so far I've included in the description a git diff of the exact changes for the video, so you can copy and paste any large blocks of code. This code here just configures the pipeline to expect a dynamic viewport and dynamic scissor to be provided later. And finally, remove the return statement if you still have
Equals vk dynamic state viewport vk dynamic state scissor. Okay, start structure pipeline dynamic state service data. Dynamic states and then dynamic states count, and then config for the dynamic states not flags equals 0. Okay, this can be deleted. Viewport info, we don't need another one. Config info data, viewport info. Can make sense. Any other errors?
Here. Now scroll up to the create graphics pipeline function. If you have a local viewport info being created,
No, it's no
pipeline
longer.
function. If you have here, to be provided later.
Yeah, we're not returning it anymore.
And finally, remove the return statement if you still have one here. Now scroll up to the create graphics pipeline function. If you have
Graphics pipeline function. Get shader default. Yeah.
a local viewport info being created, you can get rid of that and update this line to use the config info.viewportinfo. And then
Dynamic set. Dynamic set.
now in the first app implementation file, go to your create pipeline function, create a local pipeline config variable, and then initialize it with the updated
First.
config info function.
Pipeline.
And height arguments. Then in the record command buffer function, just after the begin render pass command, let's configure the dynamic viewport and system.
Is it not letting me create an interior? Pipeline. Config.
A good opportunity to copy and paste from the change file. So we set up a viewport and scissor with the swap chain dimensions. And then we use VK.
I just check the diff. Therefore, you should also. What's the time here? 11:46. Yeah,
In the
117.
pipeline class, when deleting the copy operator, this shouldn't be void operator equals, but LVE pipeline reference operator equals.
pipeline. Pipeline default. It's still an issue here. Maybe some other fix will be there for this.
Really done this in the swap chain and device code as well, so make sure to update all.
Here we're at 11:47. Now I just go to the GitHub, view file changes. Okay, I should load. I should load C. So now first oh, it's CPP. Control F. First, yeah. Okay, we create swap chain, create pipeline, we create swap chain, extend, and we get extend while width, okay, and wait idle. This I think will come later. And then create pipeline. Then search, create pipeline. Or default. What was the issue with the previous one? Was there like a spelling there? Pipeline config info. Okay, default. I perhaps put it in the wrong area. At some point, that seems to have been added. I'll also keep. If it's not required, not required. Okay, well, let's see, create. Default pipeline, okay. Get render pass. Okay, create command buffer. Okay. Okay. I'll just continue watching.
Viewport and scissor with the swap
Record command buffer.
chain dimensions. And then we
Give begin render paths. Yeah. Array model, array pipeline. VK viewport. Viewport. Say viewport. X. With 0.0. Not Y. With 0.0. F. With hyphen that marks that. Scissors. Yeah.
with the first argument as the command buffer at image index, followed with 0 for the
Yeah, why was it just over there? Okay.
index, 1 for the viewport count, and a pointer to the local viewport object as the final argument.
VK command set viewport set scissor. Okay.
For the scissor, we use vk command set scissor with identical arguments except for the final argument being a pointer to the scissor. So every frame now we record a command buffer and dynamically set the viewport just before submitting the buffer to be executed. This way we'll always be using the correct window size even if the swap chain changes. In the recreate swap chain function, we shouldn't yet remove the call to create a new pipeline, since technically the pipeline is still dependent on the swap chain's render pass. In tutorial 5, I said a render pass is kind of like a The same pipeline can potentially work just fine with a new swap chain and a different render pass, so long as the render passes are compatible. I've included a link to the compatibility documentation in the description, so a future optimization will be to check if the render passes are compatible, and if so, then the pipeline doesn't.
If render pass compatible, okay.
Created. One last thing we should do when creating the new swap chain is to provide the previous swap chain if it exists. This can potentially result in better resizing behavior if any resources can be reused, and also depending on the platform helps with transitioning full screen permissions. Okay, so start by including memory in the LVE swap chain header. Now,
Swap chain, function include memory.
to add a second constructor. This constructor will have an additional shared pointer, angle bracket LVE swap chain called previous. STD shared pointer, angle bracket.
So this on a steady shared pointer, only chain, swap chain, is
called previous. Then add a private function void init, and add a new member variable std shared pointer function void init.
void
and add a new member variable std shared pointer LVE swap chain.
is adding it under std shared pointer, only swap.
The init function.
Swap chain CPP void only swap chain. What did I name? Yeah.
Place the constructor.
.c control.
Copy and paste the constructor and add a third parameter shared pointer LVE swap chain previous. And in the member
Yes.
Initialize old swap chain curly brace. Now in the function.
Match. Comment. Connect.
The null pointer. We will use the old swap chain only during initial.
Clean up old swap chain since that no longer required. Old swap chain equals
Is using it. Then near the end of the create swap chain function, which should be around line 176, you can see here that we have a
176.
that is being used to configure a Vulkan object. Currently for the old swap chain,
Old swap chain equal null pointer.
old swap chain arrow swap chain.
Old swap chain arrow swap chain.
Swap chain function, add an if statement to check if LV swap chain is equal to a null pointer. Then create our swap chain as we currently are doing.
First steps. Node he creates swap chain here. We swap chain equal null.
Else the current swap chain is not null, so therefore create a new swap chain, with the third argument being std move LVE swap chain.
Oh, it's we swap chain equal std make unique. We swap chain we device next. Copy this, paste.
Not familiar with move mechanics and smart pointers, I highly recommend taking a couple minutes.
Steady move. Always switch.
Video to read about them at Learn CPP. But essentially, you cannot copy a unique pointer. So what this move function does is it allows us to create a copy, but in doing so, will automatically set LVE swap chain to be a null pointer so that memory management isn't broken. Then in your application header file, declare a new function just under create command buffers with void free command buffers. Then
Yeah. The header file.
just under create command buffer. Then in your void free command buffer.
Void free buffers. Yeah.
Then in the implementation file, I'll add void first app free command buffer.
Void first command buffers.
And in the body, I'll call vk free command buffers with lve device.device, lve device.get command pool, command buffers.size, and command buffers.data. And I'll cast size to a uint32 type with a static cast.
Static was free. Buffers directly.
Swap chain function. Let's check that if the new swap chain image count is not equal to command buffers.size,
We swap chain not equal image count. Command buffers type size.
to free the command buffers and create new ones. One
Free command buffers. Create command buffers.
two assertions in the create pipeline function to check that the
Assert. Always swap chain not equal null. And cannot create pattern before swap chain. Assert pipeline layout not equal null. And done. Cannot create pipeline before pipeline layout.
been
Right of that one area. That create pipeline
initialized. Build and run your project to make sure everything is still working as before. In summary, we've set up a callback function that listens to change.
Okay, let's try it. Hopefully, it should all work. Showing an error. Command buffer command must is more than 0. Then errors whenever. Okay, let's start. We plan to 195. Just confidence for an issue. I'll just try it and see what happens. Why is it getting deleted? Missed it. Might have done something wrong somewhere. If you want to go full screen after creating frame buffer,
vk device wait idle with arguments lve device.device. This
1 second. And let's see if we can figure out what this issue is. We have to filter open JSON file that is at 4. This one person mentioned I'm deleting the copy once. See pipeline. Let me check this. Let's go to pipeline. Let's see pipeline config. And the pipeline HTTP. Yeah. Let me just check the browse files. Vulkan engine. This is tutorial 8. Let's go to the pipeline. Okay, pipeline config, pipeline. Delete. This. Camera, that's fine. Let's go through it from here. Okay, pipeline config info default. Okay, and string, whatever. Then OV pipeline, device, word file path, and enter. Yeah, OV pipeline destroy, delete, and plus delete operator, void bind, and static this. Then create graphics, and CPP. See sort of stream, std accept pipeline model, array device, and config info.
Pipeline function following swap chain creation. In the first app constructor, we can then change the function call from create pipeline to recreate.
Hmm. See where were we? Array pipeline, destroy all this stuff. Credentials, create graphics pipeline, change it a bit. The sort, null pointer, null pointer. Create and dynamic state, then viewport, create shader module, run everything there, then command buffer, pipeline bind, point, graphics pipeline, viewport, null info, scissor count, confirm, pieces of null pointer, and first let's try again. 28, no return statement in function returning non-void. It changed it to void. Okay. Yeah. Right. Okay, now let's save and let's try. Okay, first what's CPPU and 69 roughly. Was the HPPPU static one? Okay, let's press static. Okay, it still crashes. We'll figure this out on tomorrow's stream. Shall end things here for now. Okay, see you all tomorrow.